The apartment was quiet in the way that only becomes possible after a 4-year-old finally surrenders to sleep. Marcus Webb stood in the hallway outside Zoe's room for a full 30 seconds, listening. He had learned early on that silence was not always trustworthy. Sometimes Zoe would go still for 10 minutes, lull him into thinking the night was his, and then appear in the kitchen doorway with one sock off and a deeply philosophical question about why clouds don't fall. But tonight, he heard only the soft pull and release of her breathing, steady and complete, and he finally let himself exhale. He moved through the dark apartment the way he always did, barefoot, memory mapped. Left around the corner of the couch, step over the stuffed triceratops she called Gerald. 2 steps to the kitchen counter. And he poured himself the last of the decaf and stood by the window, looking out at Chicago in November. The city was still doing its thing. Tail lights on Michigan Avenue, a couple arguing under an umbrella, a man walking a dog that was absolutely done with the cold. Life, proceeding without him. Marcus picked up his phone. Opened Instagram. Closed it. Opened it again. Scrolled for 90 seconds and felt nothing. Closed it. He should sleep. He had a product review at 8:30, and the prototype he'd been redesigning for 2 weeks still had a navigation flow that made him want to throw his laptop into Lake Michigan. He opened the dating app instead. He told himself it was boredom. Not loneliness. Boredom was manageable. It had a shape and a solution. He'd downloaded Spark 6 months ago. I'd gone on 2 dates that were perfectly pleasant and utterly hollow, then deleted the app. This was the 2nd download, or maybe the 3rd. He wasn't keeping score. He swiped past a woman who listed hiking and brunch in the same sentence as if they were equivalent activities. He swiped past someone whose entire bio was a list of requirements. He almost put the phone down. Then he stopped. Her profile was almost aggressively simple. 1 photo, not a posed shot. Just a candid moment in what looked like a bookstore, caught mid-laugh, face slightly turned. Bio. Recovering perfectionist. I make decisions for a living and still can't choose what to order at restaurants. If you quote Camus on a first message, I will unmatch you. No job title, no height, no filtered selfies. Her name was Elise. Marcus stared at her profile for a moment longer than he usually would. Then he typed, Camus is overrated anyway. More of a Toni Morrison person myself. He sent it before he could think too hard. Put the phone face down on the counter. Drank his coffee. Told himself it probably wouldn't go anywhere. The reply came 4 minutes later. You just earned yourself a response. Most guys open with their salary or a pun. Go on. Marcus smiled at his coffee mug. The city went on glowing outside the window. He started typing. They met at Sal's Pizzeria in Wicker Park on a Thursday evening in early December, which Marcus had suggested because it was loud enough that silences didn't feel loaded and cheap enough that nobody owed anybody anything. He arrived 4 minutes early. She arrived 3 minutes early. And they both had that look of someone who had been standing outside for a moment collecting themselves. Marcus, she said. Elise. He held out his hand, then felt the formality of it and laughed a little. She laughed too. The handshake dissolved into something more like a greeting between people who'd been talking for 2 weeks already, which they had. She was smaller than he'd expected, and more still, the kind of person who seemed to take up exactly the right amount of space, no more. She wore a dark green coat and her hair was natural, pulled back except for the pieces that weren't, and she had the eyes of someone who listened for a living. They got a corner booth. Marcus ordered a margarita and a beer. She ordered the sausage and fennel and a sparkling water and then said, I changed my mind. I'll make it a beer, which for some reason made him feel better about everything. The conversation moved the way good conversation does, not in a straight line, but circling, dipping, finding its own current. They talked about the work. He was a UX designer at a mid-sized tech firm. She said she was in strategy and left it there. He talked about the particular satisfaction of making something complicated feel intuitive. She asked questions that weren't small talk, real questions, the kind that meant she'd been listening to what he said before. He told her about Zoe without planning to. It just came out, somewhere between the first and second beer, when she mentioned she had a terrible poker face around children. "I have a daughter," he said. "She's 4. Her name is Zoe, and she is completely unhinged in the best possible way. Last week she told me her stuffed dinosaur was going through something and she needed me to give it space." Elise laughed. The real kind, the kind that took over her whole face. Going through something. "I respected the boundary. I didn't approach Gerald for 3 days. "Gerald?" she repeated. "You named the dinosaur Gerald?" "She named it Gerald. I would never." She was still smiling when she said quietly, "She sounds incredible." And there was something in the way she said it, a flicker, quick and then gone, that Marcus noticed but didn't press. He didn't ask about her life beyond what she offered. She didn't offer much, but what she offered was real, and real was more than enough. They sat for 2 hours. The pizza was good. The beer was cold. When they finally stood to leave and the cold air hit them outside the restaurant door, she pulled her coat collar up and said, "This was nice." "Yeah," Marcus said. "It really was." He walked to the train. He did not check his phone the whole way home. He was too busy just letting it sit in him, whatever that had been. The particular warmth of a night that had asked nothing of him and given him something anyway. The weeks that followed were careful. That was the word Marcus kept returning to. Careful. The way you carry something you're not sure about yet, with 2 hands, close to the body. They texted most days. She had a dry, quick wit and an unnerving habit of cutting straight to the center of things. He liked that about her. They met twice more, once for coffee near the Loop, once for a walk along the Riverwalk before the cold made it impossible. Each time, something settled between them more fully. But Marcus watched himself. He had made a rule after the divorce, not an explicit rule, just a quiet understanding he'd arrived at somewhere in the long nights of that first year alone with Zoe. He would not bring someone into his daughter's life until he was certain that the person was real, that the feeling was real, that it would last long enough to mean something to her. Zoe was 4. She attached to things. He had seen her sob for 45 minutes over a balloon that escaped into the sky. He was not going to let her attach to someone and then have to explain absence. So he kept the 2 halves of his life separate and tried not to wonder about the things he didn't know yet. Because there were things he didn't know. He sensed it. Elise was careful too, in her own way. She deflected certain questions with such smooth grace that he barely noticed she'd deflected them at all. When he mentioned his weekends with Zoe, she always asked about Zoe specifically and never said much about her own. She canceled one Saturday evening at the last minute, "Sorry, something came up, family," and was slightly distracted for a few days after. He didn't push. It wasn't his place yet. Maybe it would be, one day. What he knew for certain. She made him feel like himself in a way he hadn't expected to feel again. Not the version of himself that performed competence all day at work, or performed calm for Zoe's sake, or performed okayness for his mother who called every Sunday and still said, "So how are you really doing?" in that particular tone. Just himself, whatever that actually was. That was enough to stay careful for. The cold had settled into the city like a resident. The Riverwalk was almost empty, just the 2 of them, and a man in a bear's jacket walking at a pace that suggested he was training for something. The river was the color of pewter. Their breath made small clouds. They had been walking for 40 minutes, talking about everything and nothing when Elise went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. She had several kinds of quiet, and he was learning them. This one was the gathering kind. She stopped, put both hands on the railing and looked out at the water. "I need to tell you some things," she said. Nay, and I'm going to need you to just let me get through them before you respond. Marcus turned to face her. Okay. She didn't look at him. She looked at the river. My name is Elise Harmon, as in Harmon Ventures, the firm. My father is Richard Harmon. I'm the CEO. She paused. I told you I was in strategy, which is technically not a lie. I didn't tell you the rest. I've learned that telling people up front changes how they see me, how they talk to me. I wanted you to know me first. A short silence. I should have said something sooner. Marcus absorbed that. Let it settle. He already knew how to hold surprise. He'd had enough practice. Okay, he said. What's the other thing? Now she looked at him. Her expression was the most unguarded he'd ever seen it. I have a son. His name is Noah. He's 6 years old. The Riverwalk was very quiet. His father was someone I dated in my late 20s. When I found out I was pregnant, he left. That was his choice. Her voice was steady, but just barely. My father, Richard, he had a different reaction. He didn't want me to lose face professionally. He thought having a child outside of marriage with someone who'd left would undermine me. So he asked me to keep Noah private. Not hidden, but private. I didn't bring him up in public settings. I didn't mention him on dates. She exhaled slowly. I told myself it was temporary, practical. I told myself I was protecting Noah from judgment, protecting my career, protecting the family. I had reasons. I believed the reasons. What changed? Marcus asked quietly. Elise looked back at the river. You. The way you talk about Zoe. But you don't introduce her as a complication or a context or a footnote. She's just your daughter. You talk about her the way people talk about the best parts of their lives. She shook her head. I realized I was doing something to Noah I told myself I was doing for him. And that's not the same thing. She finally turned to face him fully. You don't have to say anything right now. I know this is a lot. I just needed you to know who I actually am. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The wind off the river was cold against his face. Thank you for telling me, he said. She nodded once, and something in her shoulders came down slightly. They stood at the railing for another minute, not speaking, looking at the same stretch of gray water. He drove home in silence. Didn't turn the radio on. That Zoe was at her grandmother's for the night. One of his mother's every other Friday arrangements. So the apartment was dark and genuinely quiet, and Marcus sat on the couch without turning the lights on and just let himself feel the size of what he'd just been told. He wasn't angry. He'd checked for that and found it wasn't there, not in any clean, useful form. What he found instead was fear, familiar and cold, spreading from his chest into his hands. She was a CEO. Her family was Harmon Ventures. He'd designed a component for a client that used their portfolio companies 2 years ago. Her father was the kind of man whose opinion rearranged the lives of people around him. She had a son she'd kept private for 6 years, and Marcus was a UX designer from the south side of Chicago, raising a 4-year-old alone. He with a studio apartment that had mismatched kitchen chairs and a dinosaur named Gerald in the living room. He didn't begrudge any of that. He was proud of his life, had built it carefully from the wreckage of things that didn't work out. But there was a quiet, persistent voice, one he'd been arguing with his whole adult life, that said, "You are not what she's supposed to end up with. You know that, right?" It wasn't about money, or not entirely. It was about worlds. He could feel the size of the gap she'd revealed, all the places where their lives wouldn't fit cleanly together, all the ways things could go wrong. And underneath all of it, the familiar fear that had haunted him since the divorce. What if I choose wrong again? What does that cost, Zoe? He texted Elise before he went to bed. I need a little time. Not going anywhere. I just need to sit with this, she replied 20 minutes later. I understand. Take what you need. He put his phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling and was awake for a long time. 2 weeks. He texted sporadically, enough to hold the thread, not enough to pull it anywhere. She matched his energy, gave him room, didn't push. He was the one who reached out first. Coffee? Just to talk. She chose the place. A small cafe in Logan Square that clearly had no interest in being trendy, just warm and well-stocked with good espresso. They sat across from each other at a table that was slightly too small, which meant they were closer than the conversation required. "I'm not upset about the CEO thing," Marcus said. "I want you to know that." "Are you upset about Noah?" He thought about it honestly. "No, I'm scared. There's a difference." She nodded like she understood exactly. "Tell me about your father," he said. "The real version." Elise wrapped both hands around her cup. "Richard Harmon built a company that mattered. He's brilliant, driven, and he genuinely believes that the way he runs the world is the way it should be run. He almost didn't speak to me after Noah, not because he was disgusted by me, but because he'd had a plan for my life and I deviated from it. That's how he thinks about people, as plans. And you still work for him. I'm his CEO. A pause. For now. She looked at him steadily. I've been thinking about leaving, starting something of my own, smaller, on my own terms. Her chin lifted slightly. I'm tired of fitting into someone else's blueprint, even if the blueprint is well-funded. Marcus studied her face. And there was a resolve there that he hadn't seen at the same intensity before, something that had found its feet. What does he think about you and me? He asked. He needed to know the shape of what was coming. He doesn't know yet, she said. But Marcus, she met his eyes. I need you to understand that whatever my father thinks is a separate thing from what I think. I'm not asking for his permission. She paused. I haven't done enough of my own deciding in my life. I'm done with that. Marcus looked down at his coffee, then back up at her. Okay, he said. Okay, what? Okay, let's keep going. Elise looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the polished, composed smile he sometimes saw from her in public spaces, but the real one, the one that reached all the way up. You had me worried for a minute. I'm Marcus Webb. I had me worried too, he admitted. He was more nervous than he had been on any date. He stood at the east entrance of Millennium Park in January, his breath clouding in the cold, hands in his coat pockets. Elise had asked him 2 days earlier, carefully, with an out built into the question. Would you want to meet Noah? No pressure. I just thought, if you wanted to. He'd said yes. He still meant it. But standing here now, waiting, he felt the particular weight of a moment that would be remembered. He spotted them coming from the south entrance, Elise first, and beside her a small figure in a navy blue parka, walking with the particular purposefulness of a child who has somewhere to be. Noah was taller than Marcus had imagined, and darker than his mother, with wide, the serious eyes that were already doing their assessment work before they were anywhere close. Hey, Elise said when they reached him. Her voice was careful too. Hey. Marcus looked down. Noah, it's good to meet you, man. Noah looked up at him, straight, unflinching, the gaze of a child who had learned to pay close attention to new adults. He said nothing for a moment. Then, are you going to leave and not come back? The question landed in Marcus's chest like something physical. Elise made a small sound beside him, but Marcus had already crouched down to Noah's level, hands on his knees, looking the boy straight in the eye. No, he said. I'm not going to do that. Not unless your mom tells me to go. And even then, I'll make sure you understand why. He held Noah's gaze. That's an honest answer, and I know it's not a perfect answer, but it's true. Noah regarded him with the solemn gravity of a small judge. Then he reached into his coat pocket, produced a slightly deflated soccer ball, and held it out. Do you know how to play? I'm decent, Marcus said, standing. No promises. Mom is bad, Noah said, without turning around, already walking toward the open lawn. I heard that, Elise said. You are, Noah said serenely. Marcus glanced at Elise. She had her hand over her mouth and her eyes were bright. He felt something in him loosen. Not all the way, but enough. He turned and followed the small figure in the navy parka onto the frozen grass. By noon, the cold had reached the point of commitment. The three of them retreated to the park cafe for hot chocolate. And then somewhere between the second marshmallow and Noah's declaration that T-Rexes would have been better with opposable thumbs, Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a small notebook and 2 pens. He'd brought them out of habit. He always carried something to sketch with, force of professional occupation, and now he slid 1 pen across the table to Noah. Draw me a dinosaur, he said. Noah looked at him sharply, then at the pen, then at the notebook. What kind? Your choice. Noah considered this with appropriate seriousness. Then he took the pen and began drawing with the focused intensity of someone who has given this subject significant prior thought. It was a brachiosaurus. The neck was roughly the length of the entire page. Nice proportions, Marcus said. Its neck is that long, Noah said defensively. I know. I'm serious. That's accurate. Marcus turned the notebook and added a small tree next to it that reached the animal's knee. For scale. Noah studied the addition. You can draw. It's basically my job. My mom draws bad, Noah said. Noah, Elise said. It's true. He looked at Marcus. What's your job? I make apps, like when you use a phone and you press buttons and things happen. I figure out where the buttons should go so they make sense. Noah thought about this. My app for space facts has the buttons in the wrong place. Yeah, a lot of them do. That's job security. Noah almost smiled. He covered it quickly, but Marcus caught it. On the train home, alone, Marcus looked out at the city going dark and thought about the afternoon. The soccer ball and the cold grass and Noah's focused dinosaur drawing, and the way the boy had watched him from the corner of his eye while pretending not to. The small, grave question that he would hear for a long time. Are you going to leave and not come back? He thought about Zoe. He thought about the strange gravity of children who had already learned to watch for exits. He wasn't just falling for Elise anymore. That was still true, and still true in the same way. But something else had started. Quieter and more complicated. A care for this specific child. This boy with his serious eyes and his 2 long brachiosaurus and his practiced detachment. Marcus wasn't sure yet what to call it. But he felt it. That was something. Richard Harmon was exactly what Marcus had prepared himself for, and still somehow more. He met him at a dinner at Elise's apartment, not planned or not planned by Elise. Richard had stopped by, she explained with a look that telegraphed everything, and Marcus had been there. The introduction was inevitable. Richard Harmon was a tall man who had gone silver and wore it like an intention. He shook Marcus's hand firmly, looked him in the eye the way powerful people do when they're deciding something, and smiled the smile of someone for whom hospitality is strategic. They spoke for 20 minutes in Elise's living room while she finished dinner. Richard asked Marcus about his work with the comfortable ease of a man who had interviewed people for decades. Marcus answered honestly, simply, without apology. He did good work. He knew it. Then Richard Harmon looked at him and said, pleasantly, almost gently, I respect what you've built, Marcus. I mean that. But Elise carries responsibilities, professional, familial, that require a particular kind of partnership. She needs someone who can stand in the same space as she does. I say that not unkindly. He said it like a fact, like weather. Marcus held his gaze, said nothing for 1 beat too long, which he knew read as composure and not silence. Then, I appreciate your honesty, sir. It wasn't agreement. Richard Harmon was smart enough to know that. He left before dinner. Marcus stayed. But the voice came with him into the kitchen. set itself down across from him while he ate. Someone who can stand in the same spaces. He knew what that meant. He'd known since he was 19 what that particular polite sentence meant. He didn't say anything to Elise that night about what her father had said. He said goodnight, drove home, paid the babysitter, stood in the kitchen. But he thought, maybe the man isn't wrong. Maybe the easier thing, the kinder thing, is to step back before anyone is too deep in. He thought about calling Elise, about saying something careful and final and clean. He had the words shaped up, almost ready. Then he thought about Noah holding out a soccer ball. He put his phone down, went to check on Zoe. He didn't make the call. The text came at 2:17 in the morning on a Tuesday in February. Noah's fever spiked. 104.2. I'm managing, but I'm alone with him and I got scared. Sorry for the hour. Don't feel like you have to. Marcus was already getting up before he finished reading it. He knocked on the door across the hall. Mrs. Okafor, 63, retired nurse, who had a deal with him from the early Zoe days. She came to the door in a housecoat and saw his face and said, "How long?" He said, "A few hours, I hope." She waved him off and went to sit on his couch. He drove to Elise's apartment in 22 minutes. She opened the door in a t-shirt and pajama pants, hair loose, looking like she'd been awake since midnight. Her eyes were dry, but barely. "You didn't have to," she started. "Where is he?" Noah was in his bed, flushed and restless, the sheets twisted. He looked smaller somehow, the way sick children do. Marcus took the damp cloth from Elise's hands and wrung it out again in the bowl of cool water on the nightstand, laid it across the boy's forehead. "Hey, buddy, still with us?" Noah opened his eyes. "Marcus?" He sounded surprised. "Yeah, you're okay. You just feel terrible right now, but that's what fevers do. Oh, they're annoying like that." Noah made a small, aggrieved sound that Marcus chose to interpret as agreement. "You want me to read something?" A pause. "Is there a book about dinosaurs?" Elise from the doorway said, "Bookshelf, third shelf, right side." Marcus found a well-worn illustrated encyclopedia of prehistoric life. He pulled the chair close to the bed and opened to a random page, Cretaceous period, and read aloud, in the specific tone of someone who finds the material genuinely interesting, which he did. Noah's eyes grew heavy. By the time Marcus reached the section on hadrosaurs, the boy was asleep. He stayed another hour, rechecking the temperature, swapping the cloth. At some point, Elise appeared with 2 mugs of tea and sat cross-legged on the floor beside the chair, and they talked quietly. Not about anything important, just talked, the way you do when it's late and someone you trust is in the room. Near 4 in the morning, when Noah's fever had come down to a workable 101 and he was sleeping steadily, Elise rested her head against the side of Marcus's chair. "I've been doing this alone for so long," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "I forgot what it feels like to have someone just show up." Marcus looked at her. The lamplight was low and warm, and she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He reached down and took her hand. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," he said. "I'm here." She didn't answer. She held his hand tighter. Outside, Chicago went on in the dark, indifferent and constant and full of its own weather. And in the small circle of lamplight in a child's bedroom, something shifted into place. She submitted her resignation from Harmon Ventures on a Monday morning in March, before the week had a chance to change her mind. She told Marcus first. Not because she needed his permission, she was clear about that, with herself and with him, but because he was the person she wanted to say it out loud to first. He listened. He didn't fill the space with reassurance before she was done talking. He waited until she finished, and then he said, "How do you feel?" "Terrified," she said, "and completely sure." those can be the same thing, he said. Richard Harmon's reaction was operatic. He called it impulsive, emotionally driven, a waste of everything she'd built inside the company. Elise sat across from him in his office with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the lake visible beyond, and she let him finish. And then she said, clearly, "I know you think this is about Marcus. It isn't. It's about the fact that I haven't made a decision for myself in 6 years." He went quiet in the way of men who have run out of available pressure. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I'm going to build something that's mine. You taught me how to do that, even if you didn't mean to." She walked out. She did not cry until she got to the elevator, and then only briefly. 2 weeks later, she was working out of a converted bedroom in her apartment, building the framework of what would become Meridian, a boutique consultancy focused on ethical growth strategy for mid-size companies. It was small and uncertain and entirely hers. Marcus showed up one Saturday morning with his laptop, uninvited and unapologetic. "I'm going to do your logo and your site," he said. "Don't argue. It's what I'm good at." "I can hire someone." "You can. You won't need to." They worked side by side for most of the day, Noah doing homework at the kitchen table, occasionally weighing in on color choices with the authority of someone who had strong opinions about everything. They decided on slate blue and warm white. It was Noah's call, unanimously endorsed. That evening, when the apartment was quiet and Noah was asleep, Elise looked at the logo Marcus had built on his screen, clean and considered and unmistakably right, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Like herself. Spring came in the grudging, unreliable way it comes to Chicago. 3 warm days, then 10 cold ones, then sudden green, as if the city had finally gotten around to it. Marcus and Elise had settled into something that didn't have a clean word yet. Not casual, not quite defined, something that had been tested and had held. He told her, one evening in April, sitting on her balcony with wine they weren't really drinking. "I almost called you in February, after your dad." She looked at him. To end it? To end it. She was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you?" He thought about how to say it honestly. "Because I thought about Noah handing me that soccer ball, and I thought, if I leave now, what does that tell him? That the answer to his question was yes after all." Elise set her glass down. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, something raw and direct. "Marcus, can I say something to you?" "Yeah." "I've watched you almost talk yourself out of this several times. I can see it when it happens. You go somewhere inside yourself and you get very quiet and careful. And I understand it. I have my own version of that thing." He said nothing. She continued. "You're scared that you're not enough, that this world is too complicated, that you'll mess it up somehow, and Zoe will pay for it, or Noah will pay for it, or I will. I know that fear. I've watched you carry it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to stop being scared. I'm asking you to stay scared and be here anyway." The balcony was quiet. Somewhere below, someone was grilling. The smell drifted up. "Be scared," she said softly. "Just don't disappear." Marcus looked at the woman across from him, who had dismantled the life her father built for her and was building her own from scratch, who sat across from frightening things without flinching, who had chosen him with eyes wide open. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Good," she said. She picked up her wine. "Because Noah has decided you're the official co-lead on the new dinosaur encyclopedia we're apparently writing together, and you really can't bail on that." Marcus almost choked. "He told you about that?" "He's been working on it for 2 weeks. It's very scientifically rigorous." "I know. He told me the Brachiosaurus chapter is nearly finished." Marcus looked out at the Chicago skyline and laughed, and the last of whatever had been wound tightly in him finally came loose. By the time December came around again, and the shape of their lives had grown into each other the way things do when you stop forcing them and let them find their own form. On alternate Saturdays, Zoe came to Elise's apartment and Noah came to Marcus's. On certain Sundays, all four of them went somewhere together. The Natural History Museum, Noah's standing preference, the park when the weather held, occasionally just errands, the way families end up sharing grocery stores and hardware stores and unremarkable Sundays that turn out to be the scaffolding of something permanent. Zoe and Noah had arrived at the particular relationship that exists only between children brought together by their parents' love, a mixture of competition, alliance, and the occasional fierce protectiveness. Zoe had taken to announcing that Noah was her brother to strangers who asked if they were siblings, which Noah found annoying and which he secretly did not correct. Marcus had met with Richard Harmon one more time, not orchestrated by Elise. Marcus had requested it. They'd had coffee near the Loop. Marcus had not asked for the man's approval. He had simply said, "I wanted you to know that I'm serious about your daughter and your grandson. I'm not going anywhere, and I thought you deserved to hear that from me directly." Richard had looked at him for a long time. Then he'd said, "You know, Elise has never asked me for permission for anything she actually wanted." A pause. "I think that might be why she's the only one who's ever run one of my divisions without making me nervous." It wasn't a blessing. Marcus hadn't come for one. But it was honest, which was more valuable. The evening of the first real snowfall, a Saturday in December, the four of them were in Marcus's apartment. He had made a genuinely ambitious attempt at jollof rice that had turned out well, which was either skill or luck, and he chose to believe skill. The table was cleared. Noah and Zoe were in the living room constructing some kind of fortress from every couch cushion in the apartment, a project that had been ongoing for 45 minutes and showed no signs of completion. Elise was at the kitchen counter with her laptop, still working. She was always still working, and he had stopped minding because he understood now that for her, work was not escape. It was expression. He was at the sink washing dishes, which is a peaceful thing to do when the apartment around you is warm and loud and full. He looked at the window. Snow was coming down in the particular heavy, deliberate way that meant it would stick. The city was going white and quiet. He dried his hands. He stood at the kitchen doorway and looked at the room. Elise's profile over the laptop screen, the lamp warm and low, two children building something ridiculous out of couch cushions, Gerald the Triceratops pressed into service as a structural support, snow on the window. Marcus thought, "This is what I would protect if I could protect one thing." He went to the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. He had been thinking about this for weeks. Not in a frantic way, just quietly, the way you come to know what you already know. Then he opened the drawer in the nightstand and took out the small box he had put there in October and looked at it for a moment. Then he put it in his pocket and went back into the living room. It was not a restaurant proposal. He had never been a restaurant proposal kind of person, and she had never, he suspected, been a restaurant proposal kind of woman. There were no candles set out, no hidden photographer, no engineered moment. There was just the living room with snow against the windows and two children currently in a heated dispute about whether the couch cushion fortress had a drawbridge. Zoe, yes. Noah. Drawbridges are structurally unsound. Marcus said, "Hey." Both children paused and looked at him. Elise looked up from her laptop. He was already on one knee. He hadn't planned the knee. It just seemed right. By the way some things are right before you reason about them. Elise's hand went over her mouth. "I'm still scared," he said. He wasn't talking to the room. He was talking to her. "I want you to know that going in, I have not figured everything out and I have no idea what I'm doing half the time." He held her gaze. "But I know what I want. I want this exact thing, whatever this is, with all of us arguing about drawbridges and eating jollof rice on Saturdays and building ridiculous dinosaur encyclopedias and doing it together." A breath. "Elise Harmon, will you marry me?" She was already crossing the room. She stopped in front of him and looked down at him, kneeling on the floor of his living room with a ring box in his hand, and her eyes were bright and full, and she was smiling in a way that had no composure in it at all. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. He stood. She came into his arms. He held her and felt the solidity of her, this specific person who had chosen him back with full information, and something that had been coiled in him for a long time, finally fully released. Noah's voice came from the vicinity of the cushion fortress. "Wait, is Marcus going to be my dad?" Elise pulled back slightly, eyes still wet, and looked at Marcus. He looked at her. Then they both looked at Noah, who was standing at the edge of the cushion catastrophe with his arms crossed, awaiting clarification. Zoe was not waiting for clarification. She was already climbing out of the fortress at speed. "I told you," she announced to Noah with the particular triumph of a 4-year-old who had been right about something important. "He's your dad, Marcus. Same as my dad. Because we're brothers and sisters." "We're not," Noah started. "We are," Zoe said, with the finality of someone who has settled the matter. Noah looked at Marcus, not with his usual measured assessment, but with something younger and more open, something he was still learning to let himself feel. "Is that true?" Marcus crossed the room and crouched down, same as he had in Millennium Park a year ago, eye level, honest. "That's what I'm hoping," he said. "But I think that's something we build together, you and me. It's not something I just get to say. It's something we figure out over time." He held Noah's gaze. "If you want to." Noah looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then, in the manner of a child who has decided something and does not intend to be dramatic about it, he walked forward and wrapped his arms around Marcus's shoulders. Marcus held on. Zoe, unwilling to be excluded from any hug anywhere, launched herself onto Marcus's back. "Family hug," she announced. Elise joined them, laughing and crying in equal measure, and Marcus stood there in the middle of his living room with his arms full and snow against the windows, and everything exactly as complicated and exactly as good as he'd spent a year learning not to be afraid of. Outside, Chicago went on. The snow came down heavy and deliberate, covering everything in white, making the world briefly and impossibly simple. Inside, no one was going anywhere. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday in June, Marcus, Elise, Zoe, and Noah stood in a small ceremony garden on the North Shore, with 12 people they loved and made vows that were honest, and not too long. Noah stood beside Marcus as the best man, in a navy suit, with his arms at his sides in the serious way of a child trying very hard to hold still. He made it almost to the end before Zoe, flower girl, sat down on the ground in the middle of the aisle and announced that her shoes hurt, which required a brief sidebar. Richard Harmon sat in the second row. He had not said much. He shook Marcus's hand before the ceremony and held it a beat longer than necessary, which was as close to absolution as either of them needed. In the photographs, taken by a friend with a good camera and the particular grace to capture the moment when Marcus's voice broke slightly on the word home, you can see all 4 of them. Elise, in a cream dress, looking at the man in front of her with the specific expression of someone who has stopped waiting to be sure and is simply, finally, here. Marcus, in a charcoal suit, smiling the way he smiles when he's not thinking about smiling. Noah, standing straight and solemn, one hand already reaching up to hold Marcus's without fully realizing it. Zoe sitting on the ground with her shoes off. In the best photo, she is looking up at all of them and grinning, as if she knew the whole time.